So good evening. I'm Jo Flick with the Montana State Library, and I'm here with Tracy Cook, who's going to talk to us this evening about maximizing meeting effectiveness. So Tracy, I'm going to send things on over to you.
All right, thanks, Jo. Okay, and can you see my screen?
Yes.
All right. And thank you to those of you who came. We were kind of experimenting with a different time of day, so I'm glad that some people were willing to show up. Given who's in the audience, I am going to slightly change my focus a little bit, and that is simply that since many of you are from out of state, I won't spend as much time as I was going to on the open meeting law and public participation for this particular meeting. Basically, I am, as Jo mentioned, the lead consultant for the State Library, and I'm someone that library directors, trustees, and staff can call if they have questions or if they need assistance with something going on in the library. Over the last several years, I've started working a lot with library boards, and as a result of that, I've been asked to kind of teach this webinar about meetings and meeting effectiveness. And so that was part of where I was coming from, was with library board meetings, but I myself would say I think we have a lot of meetings. And so when I designed this, I definitely tried to design something that works for everyone. Staff, department meetings, even meetings we have together with other groups, just collaborating and working together. So here is an outline of what I was going to talk about today. And as I mentioned, I'll touch briefly on the open meeting law, but not in too much detail, and in public participation as well. I might change the focus of that since we have a lot of out-of-state people at this one. Really the heart of this webinar is the last items you see on this list. And I really like interactivity when I teach face-to-face. That's my favorite part of the session. So I'm always experimenting with ways to get more interactivity. So I will be actually asking you to type in the chat box kind of your experiences with good and bad meetings. I think that's a really good place to start because it connects the tools that can make things better, and it can also help us to talk about what everybody can do. Because it's not just the chair. The chair definitely makes a difference in how a meeting runs, but all of us have some responsibility for making sure we have good meetings. So please do use the chat box and ask questions there. I will try to pause every so often to just check in and see if anybody has any questions. You can also contact me via email or phone, and I do have that information on the last slide at the end of the webinar. So in Montana, we have a very strict open meeting law, and I talked about this in a webinar we did for trustee orientations. It's the second one, and it is available on the Vimeo channel that Jo listed earlier. You know, for those of you who are out of state, you might want to check your open meeting laws and just make sure that you're following them. Most states in the United States do have something like this, and we really want to be open and transparent to our public. And that's why we have these kinds of laws. So those of you who might be dealing with library boards in particular may have some open meeting laws you might have to follow. And feel free to share in the chat box your own experiences with this law if you would like to do so. Here in Montana, basically if you receive public funding, you have to have open meetings if you're a library board, or if you are associated with a group that is receiving some kind of public funding. So this pretty much captures everybody who's associated with a government agency. Part of that open meeting law is public participation. And so what I was going to ask is how you handle public participation during the meeting and outside of it, but I think this might not be relevant to those of you who are in the audience. So I'm actually just going to take a few moments and ask you, how many of you is this an issue for you? Do you have the public participating at your meeting, and how do you handle it? Because if it's not very many of you, I'll actually just go ahead and move right into kind of the good, bad meetings and our tools for working with meetings. But I know it takes a few moments to type, so I will hang on just a sec. Yeah, board meetings, okay. I have to deal with it. Well, that's good. Okay. And never have any public show up. And a lot of Montana library boards have mentioned that as well. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm just going to skip the next slide, and we will move right in to what probably a lot of you came here to learn about, which is effective meetings. And this is something that I do really care about because meetings have a cost. If you're talking staff department meetings, you obviously have the cost of your staff. But even if you're talking library board meetings or meetings where you're a volunteer, there's still a cost. There's a cost of what you could have been doing instead of meeting. And I think it's very important to think about how to use people's time wisely. And that's sort of the focus of what I wanted to emphasize in this particular webinar. So I'm going to tell you kind of my definition of an effective meeting in just a few moments, but I'm curious, what would you define as an effective meeting? And then, in addition to that, I'd also like to know, I'm assuming probably many of you have been at bad meetings, and I thought we'd start there because they're always kind of fun. What made that meeting bad? And I'm actually going to go into edit mode, and I promise no names. I'll just type in kind of the things that you mentioned that made the meeting kind of bad. So we'll just pause here for a few moments and let me know both what you think is an effective meeting and then about meetings you've been to that were just not a good use of your time, and why were they not a good use of your time. Yeah. Organize specific purpose. That's a good one. Spin in circles or beat a dead horse. Oh yeah, that's true. Oh yeah. You'll like what I have to say on my slide, Lori. That is very true. Boring and never accomplish anything. Anything else anyone would like to add? Yep. Meetings that just happen because they are on the calendar. Walk away wondering if there was a resolution. Yeah. I'm just going to scan here and make sure I got everyone's. All right. So feel free to add some more. I can jump back to the slide. Now I'll go ahead and go to good meetings. And Joe had said you stick to an agenda. Oh, here's one. Chairs don't fully understand Robert's rules, so it's awkward. Yeah, I will go back and add that one. In Robert's rules, it actually warns the chair. It says you need to know this well enough that your people aren't able to use it to hijack the meeting, and I thought that's very good advice. So what about good meetings? Let's flip to those. Joe had mentioned earlier, stick to an agenda, but what else? What makes a meeting good? I'm hoping you guys have been to some good meetings. Everyone is involved. Yeah, very true. Anything else? Interesting content with a real purpose. You accomplish a task. Generate creativity. Yeah.
Someone earlier, or Lori earlier, mentioned expressed goals and that are well communicated.
Thank you, Joe. That is a good one.
And then Beth also said organized and a specific purpose.
organized, and a specific purpose. All right. Anything else? I think one of the things we notice is in a good meeting, we often feel energized after we've attended the meeting. And in a bad meeting, we sometimes feel tired and I think a little bit withdrawn. Anyone have anything else they want to add before I kind of switch to it? The next slide. Okay. So feel free to add anything as you think about it, but I will go ahead and switch to the next one, and I think you will like what I have to say. Definitely for me, you accomplished something, and I noticed somebody mentioned that. In fact, a couple of you worded it differently, but you definitely said we accomplished something, and I would completely agree. The second one to me is an interesting one that I'm really hoping in our culture we can start to think about and touch on. And that, you know, everyone's involved, I think someone said, but I think we have an obligation to kind of make sure that the people who attend our meetings have the knowledge and interest in whatever we're addressing. And in certain cases that they have the authority to address that particular issue. Sometimes I'm not really a big fan of meetings for update's sakes. I think updates can be done in a different way. Certainly it makes sense in certain areas, but the most powerful meetings that you've been to, the ones that people typically feel energized, are ones where they came to the table to work on a particular goal. As someone mentioned, they knew what that goal was, they knew what they needed to do, and they knew what they needed to talk about, and they felt like they had a reason to be there, that they could actually contribute to that meeting. And I hope that is something that we think about, because the nature of technology and such, we're starting to do more collaborative work, and that can be a really good thing, but sometimes it allows us to abuse this time and not remember that there is a cost to having meetings, and that when we have them, the people who are coming should be there for a reason. There's something that they can contribute, and I really am kind of big on that. And when I'm talking to kind of directors and boards and just my own observation in meetings, is I think this applies to library boards too. It's important that the board is looking at an agenda that is relevant to them. And no, you don't have to be interested and knowledgeable about everything on that agenda, but there should be something that you feel like you can contribute and you can bring something to the table. And I think that's very important and something we need to think about. I definitely think you have to have a purpose for a meeting, and that's incredibly important. The other things on here, I think you kind of mentioned, you know, the chair is making sure that everyone is participating. The chair plays a really important role in the running of a meeting, and we're actually going to take some time to talk about the chair specifically. You guys mentioned the next one, staying on topic and covering everything on the agenda. People are succinct. That's about us as attendees. Yeah, we all have a responsibility when we come to the meeting to come prepared, to contribute to the meeting, and to manage our weaknesses in such a way that we don't distract for others. And then finally I saw this referenced in something that people kind of walk away and they know what they need to, what the result is. If there's follow-up, it's really important that people know what they're supposed to do. I kind of think of a lot of meetings as where we make the decision, and the follow-up is where the action takes place. And if there's no follow-up and no action, then was that meeting really effective? And I'm not sure of what the answer is to that. I tend to lean towards no, but there is some value, though, in having meetings where you kind of move forward on some ideas, even if there might not be immediate action. So any kind of comments or thoughts on this? Please do feel free to use the chat. So it's fun to have that interactivity, and I think it makes it really interesting. And one of the reasons I love training adults is because you all bring these experiences and knowledge to the table, and it's so fun to share that with each other and to learn from each other. So I don't think this will be of any surprise to some of you. These are just some things that I call them big picture things that can help with a meeting being more effective. And I am a big believer in agendas, and that has to relate to what someone said about it has a goal and that goal is communicated. Sometimes my agendas are pretty informal when I'm dealing with a smaller group. And actually, some of the most effective agendas I've ever done are a list of questions. Rather than the formal agenda you might see with just a few words, I actually will say, here's the project we're working on, here's the questions people have been asking, let's address each of those. And they've been amazingly effective in dealing with that. Supporting materials are also really important. And if you are developing those, if you could get those out to people ahead of time, that's critical. I travel a lot for my job. It's the nature of my job. I'm on the road 2 or 3 days a week. And it's really so nice for me when I get these kinds of materials ahead of time so that I'm not kind of rushing, trying to get to it the last minute, but I have time to work it out so it works for my schedule. So I'm just going to pause for a moment and see what Joe had to say. Yeah, that's a very good point, Joe. I agree. It's really nice. And I am going to talk about minutes on here, and the minute taker in particular. That's a position that sometimes I think we tend to ignore and no one will volunteer for, but minutes are very helpful, especially when they include things like what Joe has mentioned in the chat.
And just a reminder, Tracy, the recording doesn't actually show the chat, so sometimes you might need to just restate it. Like I was talking about action items, and if somebody's watching the recording, they might not be able to figure that out. So.
Oh, thanks, Joe. So basically what Joe had said is the minutes include what actions you decided on, clearly stated with a due date, and who's responsible to remind people to follow up. The other things on this slide that are helpful, someone had mentioned Robert's Rules. Sometimes you can have just a general parliamentary procedure. This is very helpful if you are a formal group. You don't have to follow Robert's Rules, but having some kind of guidelines on how you're going to handle business, how you're going to vote, those are all things that are very helpful. Robert's Rules is just the most well-known, and it's one where you can get training and a lot of material to support you, so it's a pretty easy one to adopt if you need something like that. Ground rules are really good, and I think if you're in a small group, they can be very helpful. It's something you develop together. And I mean, it can be things like we won't have meetings for meeting's sake. We'll have a meeting because we need to accomplish something, not because it's on the calendar. That can be a ground rule for your group. But you can also have things like don't interrupt or be respectful. And what I've found when I'm working with a group that's dealing with a contentious topic is these ground rules they get people thinking that way. Even though it might seem kind of touchy-feely, a lot of times people just instinctively kind of think about it and they go, okay, I'm not going to interrupt, I am going to be respectful. And that can be very helpful if you're dealing with something controversial where people feel really passionate about a particular thing. And then the minute taker, Joe and I talked about that in minutes, and we will talk about that one in more detail. And you're here right now on the training and how to run meetings and how to facilitate meetings. A wise mentor of mine once said to me, she kind of felt like she knows service groups such as Seroptimus and Rotary, they're shrinking, and she said one big loss of those groups is that now we're not involved in those organizations. And one of the things they did was they taught us how to run meetings and how to be efficient in our meetings and with the use of our time. And I thought that was a very interesting statement to make. And I really have to say, I think it's only been recently that I've seen training out there about how to run meetings. If you can get some, it is very helpful. And really, it's all about managing people. So a lot of what I learned in the trainings I took on running meetings, I find useful in all walks of life. And so, anything else that you found helps with meetings that you think it would be good to share with others? And you can just post that in the chat. And as Joe mentioned, I did create an online self-paced tutorial for Robert's Rules, and I'm going to be posting it on the State Library's Learning Portal. Start on time. Yes, that is very true. All right. I will go ahead and move to the next screen, but feel free to add anything you want. I am actually going to put you to work again. Thank you for participating. I think it makes it much more interesting and much more fun. So what is the role of the chair in a meeting? What do they do? And you can just post in the chat box again. Create a clear agenda. Keep meeting on track. Mediate conflicts and make sure all voices are heard. Anything else people would like to add? Keep group on topic. And chair topics that are going to be tabled to the next meeting. And I'm not sure actually what you mean, Lori, on that second one. Do you just mean that they'll be there for the next one? Chair topics. Restate decisions. Okay. So you kind of mean that they try to keep things from being tabled, and instead of discussing all the time and going round and round in circles, they ensure that there's an ending and a decision that's made. Okay, got it. All right. Okay.
I was just going to say to Tracy, that's actually a really important one because, when you're at meetings, when you're having a discussion about something, but you don't have all of the information you need to make a decision, and sometimes the discussion will go on, and really you need to table that and come back next time with more information. And that's a good point that Lori made.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Sometimes as a chair, the best thing you can do is say, I think we need more information, and now we're done. And so-and-so is going to go find that out and come back next meeting, and we'll talk about it some more and deal with it. That's a great point. Anything else anyone wants to add for the chair? Okay, these are some good thoughts. So I will go ahead and go back to this one. And I think you can see a lot of what you talked about in this particular slide. The one thing I will say, I think most of you are dealing with kind of staff or departmental meetings where you might be the chair, and so you would design the agenda. But I think one of you was a deputy director and deals with boards, and so I will just say, one thing I love is when I hear a director tell me that their library board chair kind of jointly creates the agenda with the director, and they kind of work as a team getting feedback from other trustees and important staff in the organization to create the agenda together. I love seeing that teamwork, and a lot of times those libraries that tell me that happens are libraries where good things are going on. Okay, it was Lori. Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know if that's how it works in your organization. I totally understand it's different in different places. Sometimes the director or the assistant director, they develop the agenda. Sometimes it's the board chair, sometimes it's both, but it's just great when you can see that kind of teamwork going on. For the rest of you, it might be more appropriate. You're the chair of whatever meeting you're at, and so it is more appropriate for you to design the agenda on your own, and that makes sense. I think most of you mentioned, the next items on this list, and so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. I think it would be really interesting for us to actually talk about the 3 problems that directors tell me about and chairs tell me about. And that's, how do you handle quiet people, how do you handle people who talk too much, and how do you handle disputes. And so I think it's good, it would be good for us to talk about those. The summarized meeting, that is very important, and the best chairs I've ever seen do that. They just kind of say, here's what we talked about, here's what we decided, here's what you said you were going to do, and when you said you were going to do it. And that is key to that follow-up, which for me is that piece that really helps you feel like that meeting was a good use of your time. For library board meetings, this may not work. In Montana, our library boards, typically they bring forward business, they make a decision, then they move on to the next item of business, and so the chair's generally summarizing after each business item. And the motion and the way it's made in those meetings really typically does this. It tells you what's going to happen. But for regular staff or department meetings, this is really critical to be able to summarize the meeting. Okay, so I'm going to go back to edit mode, and this is a question I have had from people, and it's basically, how do you encourage quiet people? So those people who just don't speak up in the meeting, how can you as a chair or wherever your position is in the organization, if you are working with this, how do you get those quiet people to participate? Yeah, those are both good. Okay. Usually they have some topic on the agenda they are interested in. Try to have that be on the agenda. Yes, that's a good one. Make a habit of going around the table so everyone is treated the same. Okay. That's really useful too. Anything else that anyone wants to add? Before I'm going to go on to the next slide, I think I just want to pause here because I know it takes time to, this is a hard one. You know, it was a challenging one when I was asked it, but as one of the formerly quiet people, I do understand why they asked it. I'll go ahead and go on to the next one, but I would like to know how many of you have you have electronic or online meetings or teleconference meetings, because if a number of you do, I would be happy to kind of talk about solving some of these problems in that forum, because it's a little different than if someone's there face-to-face. But if none of you have to deal with that, we can skip that. So I'll go ahead and go back. No, I mean in the near future. Yeah, we are having more and more online meetings, but that, I think it's because Montana is so large, as some of you might have heard. I mean, Joe and I, in terms of Montana, we live relatively close to one another, and yet we're 2.5 hours apart. So online tools are very handy for us. But they do require a slightly different method of running a meeting if you're a chair. So here are my tips for handling quiet people. And I think someone said this outside of the meeting, talk to them, and I'm a real big believer in that. The first couple of times, you need to give them that feedback outside of the meeting. If you're a quiet person, people have told you you need to speak up more, and so you tend to view that as criticism. it can be very accurate criticism, but you still see it as criticism. And so it's important to not embarrass someone publicly. So as chair, just take them aside, kind of really encourage them. And I try to kind of focus on the positive, that they have something of value that they can add. And as such, you really need to hear from them. And then you can call on them during the meeting, but it's good to give them a heads up beforehand to just make sure that they know you're going to do that. The other thing that I have seen really good chairs do is they watch for body language. And sometimes your quiet people do want to speak, but they've been so well trained that they should never interrupt, that they won't interrupt. And as a result of that, if you have a group of very enthusiastic people and they're all talking and they're constantly talking, the quiet person never gets a chance to say their piece. And so the really good chairs are watching body language, and they basically force an interruption and call on that person and give that quiet person a chance to speak. So if you're the chair, if you can do that, if you can watch that body language, and then basically interrupt if you need to give that person a chance to speak. The other thing with quiet people is sometimes they're your thinkers, and you don't really want to call on them first, because what they are doing is they're listening to what everyone is saying, and then they're thinking about it. And if you save them for last, they have a tendency to summarize everything up in about 1 or 2 sentences that sometimes provide the breakthrough we need when we're working on a discussion. So that's another technique you can use. And that's one of the nice things if you get to chair a group that you've worked with quite a bit and you get to know those people, is that you do that going around the table, but you actually time it so that you're getting to that quiet person at the end so that they can summarize it. So let's see what Joe had to add. You can ask a colleague who is friendly with a quiet person to prompt them, and give the friend that assignment and let them know you'll support them in getting the quiet person involved. That is another way that you can do it as well. All right. So the last one is kind of related to the first part of the slide. Just remind everyone that it's important to participate. And I will bring this up at this juncture, is sometimes people are quiet because they don't really feel like they can contribute in the meeting. And that's actually a bigger problem than the fact that the person is quiet. That just maybe means you need to go back to that very first thing I said when I was defining effective meetings. It's like, is everyone at the table someone who should be here? If you think they are and they can contribute, give them that opportunity. And you had great ideas for how to do that, like the adding an agenda item that they're interested in. And as Joe said, get a friend to help them out. Okay. So feel free to add things as you think about it. But let's go ahead and talk about the other side of that equation. What if you have someone who is a talker? They love to talk, and it's very hard to get them to stop talking. How, as a chair, can you handle those people? Okay, set a time limit in advance. Yes, and in case you were wondering, Robert's Rules actually gives 10 minutes, although you can have 10 minutes twice. Politely but firmly. Summarize the agenda, topic being discussed, and move on. Okay, yep, absolutely. The chair can interrupt, and sometimes you have to. Anything else? This is kind of a hard one too. I think it's very hard to give criticism when you're working with people. Any other suggestions? Yep, that's a good one. Thanks, Joe. Don't let them move off topic. And sometimes that does happen. Acknowledge what they have to say, but guide them back. Okay, so I will go ahead and move on.
Tracy, is it appropriate for the board?
Next slide. Yeah.
Is it appropriate for the chair to talk to that person outside of the meeting and just say, I'm really trying to get everybody involved, and could you always have a lot of really good things to say, but can you let the people go first or something? Is that a good way, or is that kind of risky?
That is actually totally appropriate.
Okay.
It can be kind of risky, but I think actually you may have to do that. And you always have to kind of ask yourself with any of these things, are we talking about a one-time or maybe even just 2 meetings? In which case, you may decide that, you're going to let that go. You're not going to try to talk to this person. But if you're talking about recurring meetings.
Yeah, it's right at the top of your list there.
Yeah. Yep. Again, and if you're talking about recurring meetings, it's a good idea to just kind of pull that person aside and be honest with them. And I have known a couple people like this, and I've kind of just said to them, I love your enthusiasm. I'm glad you care about this topic. I need you to do me a favor. Some people are not able to participate because they're kind of shy, and so I was wondering if you could just kind of limit yourself a little bit. Because I suspect that talkers, just like quiet people, have been told they need to talk less, and so again, it is criticism. And so I think it's far better to, outside of the meeting, let them know that it's a problem rather than calling on them. You can also make them the minute taker or the timekeeper. That's another little trick that you can do. The other thing on here, I say ask them to go last, and then as chair, you can use what, I can't remember who it was, but someone said, you jump in and you summarize the agenda item, and so you can kind of control it a little bit better. You can go around the table, and you can use Robert's Rules of Order if necessary. The other approach that one chair told me about was very direct. I mean, she had talked to the woman on her board multiple times, and she finally said, I just kind of in the board meetings said, okay, you have 1 more minute. And I was like, wow, that's really direct. But this board member who was talkative knew that she tended to talk a lot. And so she took it fine. And in fact, eventually, you could almost say she was trained. She just sort of said, okay, she knew how long she had, and she learned to speak within that time frame and to not go over and to not spend as much time talking as she did in the past. So that is another option that you can use if necessary. Any questions about anything we've covered? This might be a good place to just pause. Sometimes I know when I'm taking workshops, I think about a question about an earlier topic a little bit later on, and I just want to give you a chance to ask any questions before we talk about conflict. Okay. I will go ahead and switch screens here. Okay, so what about disputes? And I don't know if anyone has had this happen. I have actually seen this where, unfortunately, 2 or more people in a meeting actually get into a conflict at the meeting, or sometimes you're talking about a topic that's contentious. People feel very passionately about their side of the issue. So how can you handle those if you're a chair? Or actually, if you're a member of the group, you might have some options too. So anyone have any suggestions to add to my slide? You guys have had good suggestions so far. So I'm sure you do for this one too. Joe can warn you, I am willing to wait.
Well, these are thoughtful questions that are not easy to answer, so you really have to, yeah. So best to cut them off. I mean, if it's a conflict, then there is. I think that's a good point. There are times when you have to say, okay, you guys are obviously having a disagreement. I think we are going to move on to the next agenda item. We'll table this or something like that, right? Yeah, I like presence too. That's a good point.
That is a good one. And sometimes just kind of going back to that at some point cut them off, sometimes the direct approach is the right approach. And if the conflict is bad enough, that actually may be exactly what the chair needs to do. And I know sometimes that's why people don't want to be the chair, because they don't want to deal with these things. But you know, being a chair, if you do have to deal with these, it gives you some really great skills that are very helpful in your personal and professional life. So people in the group, find a resolution. So is it a good idea to find a neutral ground somehow? Yes, it is. And in fact, in the next slide, I talk about that. Because a lot of times, people might agree on the end point. It's actually how we get there. That's what people argue about, is the how. So people in a group like to find resolution, table the issue, or set up an ad hoc committee to review it and end it. Yep. Yes. Anything else? This is a tough one. And I think it's one thing if you kind of know you're going to go into a meeting that's a little bit contentious. It's something else entirely if it blows up and you weren't expecting it, and that could be hard too. Restate, reframe the issue, and see if there is something they can agree on. Yep. Okay. All right. I will go ahead and put the next slides up. And Joe had kind of mentioned the table, the issue, which is at the end of this. But, you know, if you really have to work through this, and that's not an option, or perhaps it's kind of just a minor conflict, it's not something that's escalated to the level that, you know, you need to stop it in order for the group to not totally melt down. You know, call a break. That's what this first one is about. If you're in a formal group, there is actually a motion from Robert's Rules that's asking for a recess. If you're in an informal break, then you as the chair can just say, I think we need 10 minutes. Give ourselves a chance to calm down. We'll come back in 10 minutes. And you as a chair can then prepare a process that addresses some of the things that you talked about, like making sure each side gets to speak and that everyone listens. And that is actually the established ground rules, and give each person a chance to talk. These are just kind of my suggestions for a process you can use. And so if you have a break, you as a chair can go ahead and set this up. You know, I don't think I put it on here, but one thing I would really one thing I would recommend, if you can at all do this, is if you have a flip chart or some way of writing down what people say, that can really help. It makes the flip chart the focus, not the people. It makes people feel validated because you are actually writing down what they've said. it also tends to make people watch what they say because you're writing it down. And so that tends to tone down their language if the problem is that they're basically getting too insulting or too vicious in their attacks. If you're writing down what they say, they tend to neutralize it naturally. So a flip chart is an amazingly helpful tool if you are working through something where people feel very passionately about the issue and they're on opposite sides. The second point, to remind people that we are here to serve others, that is actually something that I learned from I follow a nonprofit consultant who does work with a lot of groups who may have controversy and may have tension. And she's the one who shared that a lot of times if you ask people, well, what do you want the future to look like? They all say the same thing, that our children are safe, that people have food to eat and, houses, that we have clean water. I mean, a lot of times they actually agree on that. It's how we get those things. That's what they disagree on, and that's where the problems arise, because somehow the how is personal. It's related to who we are and what we believe and how we approach life. So as chair, you can kind of pause for a moment and say, why are we here? Well, it's to serve our community and to meet our community's needs. And you might find that that's a place where you can all agree. And by going there, you take away some of that personal value issue. You get people all on the same page. And then it's a little easier to work with that how. It's just somehow when you see that person across the table and you know that actually the end product, the end thing that the community gets what they need is what they want too, it makes you more willing to listen and to be respectful and speak respectfully. So these are just kind of suggestions I have if you do end up in a meeting where there's some controversy or there's some conflict. And in case you were wondering, in Robert's Rules of Order, if any of you use it, one of the 10 basic rules is personal remarks are always out of order. So you can call someone on that if you use Robert's Rules of Order. If you don't, because some of you are an informal group, that's perfectly okay, but let's face it, personal remarks are still out of order. And that can be one of your group rules that you set up at the beginning. The last one I kind of touched on briefly. Sometimes it is the best thing you can do is end the meeting, because what happens is what is happening is so destructive that the group is going to be in trouble if you don't end it and have people come back to another meeting. And if necessary, you may even have to do a facilitator or a mediator, someone else on staff, just to kind of come in and help you work through that. That may be what it takes. The thing I remind myself with libraries, we can sometimes feel this pressure to make a decision, but if we really think about it, a lot of what we do, nobody dies, and we need to remind ourselves of that. And so if it's necessary for the health of the group, we may not be able to make a decision at this meeting. Some conflict is good. Some dispute is good. We often get our best ideas from those things, but we don't want to tear each other apart. And so we may have to end that meeting so we don't tear each other apart. So any kind of thoughts on this one? I'll just kind of pause for a few moments here and see if anybody has any questions. Yeah, time out for adults, it's true.
These are all hard, actually.
I have been at meetings where I've wanted to put people in the corner.
No, I thought the first one was the hard with trying to get shy people engaged, but then these are all hard.
Yes, they are.
Maybe that's part of it too, is recognizing, this is the hard work that happens when you put more than one human in a room, that there's likely to be some of these kinds of inequalities and issues that come up. So as you were saying, acknowledging that that's sometimes in the conflict is where the most important work happens. Reminding yourself of that is important.
Yep, absolutely. And I really wish, as someone who often chairs meetings, that there was more training for this specific kind of thing, like not just how to run a meeting, but how do you deal with the problems that can arise. because oftentimes how you run a meeting is very procedural and it flows. Where the problems come up is people interacting with each other. That's where the challenge lies, and that's why I wanted to take some time to talk about these and hopefully give you guys an idea of maybe some things you can try if you ever find yourself in this situation where you have these problems. Yeah, Susan, having ground rules are really a good idea. They really do help. Okay, so I'll go ahead and shift gears, and maybe this one will be a little bit easier. I was throwing some kind of harder questions out at you. So what about attendees? We've been talking about the chair, and the chair definitely plays an important role, but so do we, those of us who are attending the meeting. So what do we need to do to create an effective meeting? What are our responsibilities?
You're right. This is easier. It's what we can do.
It is much easier. Anything else? Don't come in late and socialize. Yeah, oh, that is a good one.
And
My next slide, you're going to see the word respect more than once.
Yeah, don't miss Beth's comment on listen. That's a good one.
Yeah, I added be patient and listen to others. I added her to others. But I think that is a very good point.
Okay.
All right. Since we're almost out of time, I'm going to go ahead and switch to the next slide. I think you covered a lot of it. You know, do your homework. We really need to pay attention. If someone took the time to create these materials and this agenda, you know, and I tell people, it's not even just that you read it, it's that you think about it. You actually think about it. You come up with some questions and some observations that you can share at the meeting. You know, one of my favorite quotes from Joe is that the smartest person in the room is the room. It's actually one of my all-time favorites of yours, Joe. And this is what makes that happen.
I have
the room is smarter if we all come prepared.
I did steal that quote,
Yep.
so okay.
It was a good one to steal. You know, Lori had just posted, don't play games on your phone. Absolutely. And that's part of that respect. The items on this list, the next three to me, are just about being a good human being. You know, that we respect others, that we listen to them, and that we manage ourselves. You can make it so that the chair never has to come to you and say, I need you to participate, or I need you to talk less, or I need you to not play games on your phone. We can manage ourselves. And there is a great feeling of accomplishment when we manage our weaknesses and we keep them from becoming a problem in our lives and in meetings. It gives us confidence and we act better. And so it's good for you to know what your weaknesses are. Like, I know that I tend to be a quiet person. So I have tried to become better about speaking up in meetings. I don't always succeed for a variety of reasons, but I am much better than I used to be. And it was because I recognized that that was a weakness and I chose to manage it myself. And that's an important thing. You know, we typically do know what our weaknesses are. If you don't, talk to a trusted coworker who will give you some honest feedback and then work on those things so that you can improve. The last two, volunteer, are really important. Please volunteer to help out. You know, volunteer to be one of the ones to do the follow-up. And you know what? Volunteer to be the chair. And I say that after having scared you with those problems that chairs can face, but truly being the chair of meetings taught me how to be a better meeting attendee. And it also, as someone who trains, having to deal with those conflicts and the quiet people and the talkers, I'm much better, I think, in my workshops in managing the classroom, basically, because of the experience I've had as a chair and the things that I learned in there about managing people in general. So I will pause here. I actually have like 6:29 on my clock. Is that what you have, Joe?
Exactly, 6:29, just turned to 6:30, so we are at the end of our hour.
So we are at the end of our hour, so I will go ahead. I was actually just down to the role of the minute taker, and as Joe said, this will be available online, and I will make sure that I post this PowerPoint as well, that you have it, so that you have it, and you can find my contact information. I will hang out for a couple more minutes. I'd be happy to answer any questions anyone might have, but I don't want to keep you past your time, because that actually wouldn't be good. You should start meetings on time and end them when you say you're going to end them. But thank you for attending and being such a great audience. You were great about giving me that interactivity that I love when I teach.
Considering these are people from all over the West here, and they probably don't know each other, that was really, really great. It's feedback and participation, so always good stuff to be reminded of. And I'm just going to go ahead and thank you, Tracy, for this session and for everyone's input this evening, and I'm going to go ahead and stop our recording. So if you're tuning in, this is it.